Hey everybody, I'm Matt Robinson. Welcome to another edition of the Writer's Block. You know, with Zoom meetings still rampant, as you might say, it's been really hard for people to connect. Fortunately, I think some people are starting to come out of their shells, as it were, and one of the things that's really working as a connection and a connection venue is the good old coffee shop and the coffee klatch, as it were. And we have a resident expert here. This is Wendy Bornstein. And she is describes herself as a coffee-loving writer and realtor, but she's done a lot of other things. She has a BS in accounting from UMass Amherst, an MBA from BU, and has worked in consulting and volunteers all over the place, and now apparently has a real estate career, but is focusing on writing as well. And her first book is called Coffee Connections. It's a really great collection of stories of the people she's met and the coffee she'd enjoyed throughout the year, and can really be helpful if you're trying to get back out into the swing of things and reconnect with old friends and make new friends. So we're really happy to have Wendy here. Thanks for joining us.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you. Very honored.
So where did the focus on coffee come from? Like, when did you fall in love with it?
Well, it started actually when I was about 11 years old. I hated milk, and my mother thought that you had to drink milk to build strong bones.
Right.
So she insisted on me drinking milk, and I had a phobia against chocolate milk because I thought I would get acne, which was the old wives' tale back in the early 70s.
Right.
So she said, here, the last trick, I'll try coffee in your milk. And she introduced me to coffee. And first she tried coffee time, whatever that stuff was that I don't like. It was very syrupy. But then she tried real coffee, and I liked it.
So it wasn't coffee milk like in Rhode Island with the syrup.
No, she gave me real coffee,
wow.
And I started to really like it. And then as I got older, the ratio started to become more coffee, less milk.
Okay. So you really were kind of a self-taught
yes.
barista, as it were?
Definitely.
Okay. Have you taken like classes about coffee?
You know what? I went to, I think, George Howell when he first opened George Howell's, or when he was at the Coffee Connection years and years ago. He used to do some workshops, and I had sat in on one of them just to see what it was like. But I love coffee, and my brother is very good at making coffee. So every time a new coffee type espresso maker came out or a frother, he would buy it and then give me his personal lessons. And he would give me a lesson on how to do pour-over coffees and tell me I wasn't doing right, and I had to watch him, and he would sit there through the whole process. So,
did you do the little drawings on the top?
I don't do the drawings. I do the thing with just with the pour-over, making sure that there's an art to getting the beans saturated at an even level, so that it stays flat and you don't have a funnel.
Okay, I've stopped at French press, so I'm not as sophisticated. So how did that coffee become sort of your tool to start connecting with people?
Well, it was interesting because in college I started to drink coffee just to stay awake, and it became kind of my go-to to stay awake during classes. But then when I started to evolve into the corporate world, I saw people hanging out at the coffee pots. Or I worked in New York for a while, and I saw every morning I'd get off the F train, because I lived in Forest Hills, and I'd get off the F train at the Citicorp building, and everybody would be rushing to the coffee store. And it just became kind of like you'd see what everybody else was doing, and back those days, everybody had those Greek cups, with the Greek logo. Yeah. And that was just the thing. Everybody would run, get the coffee, and then run to the office. And it was a trend, so I just hey, I have to live like a New Yorker. I'm living in New York, so I started doing the same thing. And I think I always learned, from seeing and observing people around me, that conversations and people got to know each other around the coffee machine. So I started to kind of absorb that, and said I started to take that home. And I don't know I think I learned with my dad. My dad was he was a sales rep, a manufacturer's rep for years for Panasonic and Zenith. And he always had a way of building rapport with people that he dealt with before he sold them a product. So I kind of took those tips that were kind of ingrained in my lifestyle to kind of incorporate using coffee as a way to do that in the corporate world. With accounting, there's not that much to talk about. It's not exciting to say, hey, I'm going to audit you and see your accounts payable section.
Right.
But so I built the coffee in as a way to get to know the person first, so I had something interesting to talk to. And then I found people were less resilient to do whatever you needed when you were doing an audit or requested financial information from clients. I was an auditor for Dun & Bradstreet Corporate.
So you talked about the cardboard cups with the Greek decorations. Now coffee is very select. People know where they source it from. What changes have you noticed in coffee culture, how it's sold, how it's marketed, things like that, as a business?
Yeah. So interestingly, I think that, and I talk about this in my book, when I was in college, the drinking age was 18, and people hung out I went to UMass Amherst, people hung out at the Blue Wall or at the pubs, and it became like that was the way to connect with people. But as I graduated college, Reagan changed the drinking age to be 20 eventually, and then it became 21 across the country.
Right.
And so coffee, you couldn't go to bars to meet people if you were a college-age student, but you could always go to a local coffee shop. So I think George Howell, who started the Coffee Connection, which eventually was bought out by Starbucks, had insight into this, and he opened the first Coffee Connection in Boston, in, I believe, Harvard Square, and then he opened one in Wellesley Center, and Newton Center, and Brookline, like all the college towns, and students started going to coffee shops. So I think it just became more of a trend, and then it became more stylish because of the whole what's his name, Howard Schultz buying out Starbucks and putting his goal was to have a Starbucks on every street corner.
Or two.
Yeah, so it just became much more of a culture. And then now when I go to Brooklyn, you see artisan coffee shops everywhere you look. And in San Francisco, there's the Reeve, and there's all these little artisan coffee shops. So it's just become a big trend and kind of a stylish thing.
I mean, I was in Seattle about 30 years ago. Just traveling wasn't such a big deal, but now you go and the original Starbucks is like a tourist stop.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and when I first got married, my in-laws drank Sanka instant coffee, and that was it. And so I would come over with my Starbucks coffee, and my father-in-law would always laugh at me and say he made the strongest coffee in the world, and if he had coffee at my house, he couldn't fall asleep for days. So it just became more trendy, and I think the thing that's really nice about coffee is that it's very, basically it's an inexpensive way to connect with people. And it's easy to,
relatively inexpensive.
Yeah. But you can go in, you can meet somebody for under $5.
Okay.
Actually, back in the day when I first started drinking coffee, it was probably under $2. You can meet and spend an hour or two with somebody and have a cup of coffee versus going to an expensive lunch and getting a $10 or $5 lunch back then, but now a $20 lunch.
Right.
So it's a really simple way to just meet people.
When you have your meetings or just when you're in the shops, what can you tell about someone by what they order and how they order?
I can tell basically that they have never been in a Starbucks if they say, let me look at the menu. Let's see, do you have a medium or a small coffee? I want milk on the side, versus the people that go in and say, I want a grande or a tall black. People that have Starbucks apps know exactly what they want versus people that are just going in and kind of looking at the menu and kind of tell they're not really big coffee drinkers.
Okay, but once you know the lingo, if I go in and say a tall black and the person behind me is like a grande mochaccino half frap with a side of broccoli.
Yeah, I think that the serious coffee drinkers that I know drink the less fancy coffees and just like it because they like coffee.
Right.
Whereas
they don't
the people,
have to hide it.
Exactly. And I think the people that get all the fluff and whatever just really don't like coffee, but they want to mask it and have a drink to be kind of trendy.
Right, to have that social element. Okay.
Exactly.
Oh, I see. What do you think about people who say they don't like coffee? Do you not trust those people?
No, I mean, I respect them, but I don't understand how anybody can't like coffee. But I also, lately I've been, my new trend, I also have been learning a bit about tea, and I just read this book this morning, actually, called The Art of Tea, because I had heard Stephen Schwartz, who runs this company that's real high-end coffee, real high-end tea, talk about his philosophy of the ritual of having tea, and just, and it's parallel to coffee. And he points out in the book that 5 or 6 years ago, there was like a definite black and white culture. People either like coffee or people definitely like tea. And interestingly now, he said the number of male tea drinkers has increased to probably be more than female tea drinkers. And the cultures are kind of merging. So I started learning a bit about tea, and I think just as a diversion in the afternoon, sometimes I'll have a cup of tea just to kind of relax and have coffee in the morning and kind of wind down, and I'm enjoying the ritual of trying different teas. And I think that was during a COVID this winter too. I just had read about him and started sampling different things.
Yeah, I did want to ask about how COVID has affected this tradition of yours, but Also you talk about how tea has expanded, and I think kind of both. Like when you said we had Sanka and the store-bought brands and Folgers and things like that. Same with tea. We used to have like Lipton and Red Rose, and now people are kind of getting it's a whole culture unto itself as well. So I found interesting that you're open to both.
I am open. Yes. And I think that I don't know, like I've learned a lot in the past, even since COVID. You just have to be flexible, and I'm an explorer. I have a lot of curiosities, and I like to just see what's out there and learn and experience new things all the time.
Okay. And you've traveled extensively. Have you traveled like on coffee tourism?
I haven't gone on coffee-specific trips, but everywhere I go, I always check to see if there is a Starbucks just when I get there initially, just to kind of know. But then once I'm local, I like to try local coffees.
Yeah,
like, example, when we were in Italy, we were in Venice, and I went to a coffee store. And in America, people just sit here and kind of sip the coffee and drink it. In Italy, it's a functional thing. They'll get an espresso and gulp it down in 1 second. So I got an espresso coffee, or a cappuccino, I think, and I was standing just outside, right at the bar where the coffee place was, and the owner came out and yelled at us that we had to get away. Like they didn't.
You're loitering.
Yeah, it was loitering, which was interesting.
So how has COVID affected this element of your life? Not just drinking and enjoying on your own, but using it as a kind of a social connector.
So it was interesting because the first couple of weeks of the lockdown, I've been collecting coffee mugs everywhere I travel. So I have, those Wish You Were Here series, and I have cups from everywhere in the world, basically. Right. I went to Prague, I have little cups. So I said, you know what, it's a fun thing. Maybe I will, because I can't go to Starbucks, maybe I'll pretend I'm in a different location each day. And so I started pulling out my coffee mugs and doing a post on Instagram that said coffee at home while social distancing. And then I did whatever the coffee mug was, like Starbucks mug from London, Starbucks mug from Japan, Starbucks mug from Prague. And I started using those and posting those on Instagram. And then when I published my book, my editor thought I would really need to do a display of, so I did screenshots of like a grid of all the different Instagram posts.
Wow.
She did that as section breaks.
Right. So how did the book come together?
Let me, one more thing I just want to add about, one more thing I just want to add about COVID. So what happened was during COVID, I started meeting people, and I got the pay Zoom version of Zoom.
Right.
So I started having coffee meetings, and with real estate clients, and I'm also a chairperson of the cultural, I was the October Cultural Council. We would have meetings over Zoom, and I was just like, let's meet for coffee over Zoom. And we also did that with friends. We had coffee meetups over Zoom and said, since we can't meet in person, why don't we each bring a coffee and talk to each other?
As if, as close as you could. Yeah. So when did you decide it was going to be a book? How did you choose the stories and the elements? What was the process?
So what happened was, initially, I had been thinking about writing a book for years, because every time I'm in Starbucks, I love observing people around me and kind of overhear interesting conversations and just, things going on. And so I just started thinking it would be really interesting to kind of do a story on what people talk about when they're in Starbucks. So I had the idea in the back of my mind. And then we have a Havanese dog, and about she just turned 14. So 14 years ago, I was in Starbucks. I was supposed to meet a friend, and he was a half hour late. So I was looking through the newspaper because we were thinking of getting a dog, and I found a Havanese dog that was advertised in the Globe. I called the breeder, and he said, come over tonight. And we ended up getting our dog that evening. And I thought, this is like a really cool Starbucks story, because if my friend wasn't late for coffee, then I never would have had my dog. And she's now my best friend. So I just started, like, the idea, that was one of my favorite Starbucks stories. And I just started, just thinking that would be really fun to put together different stories of things that have happened. My kids, my youngest daughter, Michelle, is now 27. But when she was a baby, I used to bring her to Starbucks all the time. And when I showed her the Starbucks logo one time when she was little, and I said, what's this color? Expecting her to say green, and she said Starbucks. So I just had like different experiences with my kids as they grew up. And I started when they were little, and now they're fully off and launched, but I still go to Starbucks and meet people and have different meetings.
Have you ever been meeting with one person and someone else comes and is...
Oh, yeah, I have. And I've actually scheduled back-to-back meetings. I'm actually do that now. I just moved to the Cape a year ago. And so when I come local, I'm meeting somebody after this meeting. My sister-in-law. I'm like, hey, let's meet at Starbucks after my interview. So
I'm glad we could fit it.
Yeah. So.
What was the publishing process like for you?
What it was like was I wrote so I had mentioned Andy Winnig, who is
One of our former guests?
One of your former guests.
Yep.
Does elevator pitches, and during the start of COVID, he did a workshop called Coffee Elevator Pitch Workshop type thing, program. So I went to the program and I said, this is something, I've been thinking about writing a book about using the process because I use coffee to meet with people, and I'd love to see if you'd like to work on it with me. And so I met with him privately after this session. He said it sounded like a wonderful idea, and it just prompted me. This was the first March of COVID. So my real estate office was basically closed down. People weren't buying houses from that first April, May, June. Everything was locked down. So I said, this is a really good time to start working on my book. So I penned my initial draft and sent it to Andy. And he looked at it and it said, it's really good, but you need to develop better arcs and better stories for the items. And he gave me really good feedback. So I worked on it July 5th. I sent him a totally revised copy. And he's like, this is ready to go. Like, do you want to meet with my publisher? I feel like this is like amazing. It's like really good content and it's readable and you really have a book here. And from that point, he was going to introduce me to his editor, who he used, who only did print copies, and I really wanted to do an ebook also. So another person I knew, Kevin Walsh, who is a sportscaster. He's on NBC,
Right.
Chilton. He had also published some books, and I'm good friends with him, and I had done a couple of workshops with him through the years, and he wrote similar genre type books that were sort of memoir tying into his profession. So he gave me the name of a publisher that he had used, and I reached out to them, and we clicked and ended up using them as my publisher. And they were really good. I sent them a draft, and then they came back and forth with different suggestions and photo requests, and I worked with them, and then came together.
Wow. So it seems like a pretty quick process, start to finish.
It was pretty quick. I went through some personal changes in my life, so I had to change a few things towards the point that it was ready to be out and published. So it took about a year to get everything out and to have it out in the market.
Were there any stories that didn't make it that you're hoping to find a way out later on, or any favorites that you just didn't seem to fit quite right?
No, but I'm thinking of writing. So I moved to the Cape about a year ago, and I've gone through a lot of changes in my personal life. So I'm actually thinking now of writing a sequel, and I'm going to call it Coffee Connections Regrounded with my daily brew.
Is it for your connections on the Cape, or when you
My
come?
connections on the Cape, yeah, and it's going to be more about just moving to a new community and getting immersed and how I meet people, moving on at this phase of my life after we downsize. So, starting to work on that.
How often do you get back here, and what typically brings you back? Do you still have real estate connections here?
Real estate, I'm still affiliated with Coldwell Banker over
Right.
here in Needham. My mother-in-law is nearby, so I like to visit her. I come back probably about once a month, I'd say.
Well,
Maybe even a little bit more often. And my dog sitter that I've had since my dog was a puppy is in Dover, so whenever I travel anywhere, I leave her in Dover.
Okay. So you still have some time.
Yeah,
here.
keep everything, basically my hairdresser, everything's still in Newton, Needham, Wellesley, or whatever. So I'm back, I would say at least once a month. Now the weather's nicer, maybe every 2 weeks. I have to come back here Saturday for another event in town.
So would you say your book is more memoir, more kind of how-to inspiration guide, or a little bit of both?
So I've had feedback about it, and the memoir part has really touched people that I grew up with, because I was invited to speak at the Temple, Beth Abadar, where I grew up as a child, and people remembered back in the 60s, it was a big thing to go out to Goldman's, to go shopping and get coffee with your grandmothers. That was like a big Saturday ritual.
Right.
So that brought memories of like that age group. Then my daughters read the book, and they had no idea about that I had a career and a life before they were born. So they thought it was really inspiring to learn about my career as a finance person, an accountant, and the things I did pre-kids. Then people that I've networked with have found everybody has touched different areas of their lives, have found it really interesting. And then as far as the coffee how-to section, I put together a little section on the back with how to make pour-over coffee, cold brew coffee, and just basic coffee.
Right.
So I gave, for the person that absolutely knows nothing about coffee, I kind of wanted to cater to them a bit.
So there are elements of both. Now you have changed careers a number of times. Have these connections? You said like your friend being late for the coffee meeting led you to get your dog.
Yes.
Have these coffee meetings led you to be inspired to change directions, or have they allowed you to make connections in the new field?
Yeah, I think my biggest change has been doing the real estate I love helping people. And I was doing some consulting for a while, and then we bought our house, the most recent house that we sold about 15 years ago. And during that time, everybody in town knew me as the local one that was connected with, I'm Jewish, and Dover isn't a very Jewish town where we raised our kids, so people knew me as like the Jewish person that knew about the JCC and the temples that were local, so all the realtors were calling me all the time and wanted to meet me for coffee, to ask me advice. Like, I have a client that's moving here that wants to learn about Jewish life in Needham or whatever.
Right.
So I would always meet with them, and then my friends were saying, you're always helping these realtors, like this would probably be a really good idea for you to be a realtor. And my son was going off to college, and I was, I became intrigued with real estate when we bought our house, and I just said, I'll take the class, and I liked it because, it was a way to connect with people, and I kind of used the people skills that I had and kind of relayed into real estate. But now being on the Cape, I actually really like helping people, and I like writing, and I found that I've been enjoying doing freelance writing, so I've been trying to meet with people and connecting with the Chamber of Commerce on the Cape now to see how I can become more of a freelance writer for small businesses.
Right.
Probably ancillary to real estate.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing
Yeah.
just being freelance
Yeah.
and meeting people and making connections, a lot of them over coffee.
That's how I met you, I think.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean, it's become so ubiquitous.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
it's like a Xerox or a Kleenex, let's meet for coffee. I always joke, I
Right.
say, let's meet for milk, just to be a little different. So when you have your open houses, what kind of coffee do you serve?
I get Starbucks, and I usually get a box of Joe.
Okay, all right.
But that even changed with COVID, too. I did an open house last spring, and people were skeptical to even drink the coffee.
Right, yeah,
So,
less contact, the
Yeah.
better. Yeah. Do you see things reopening now? Are people more willing to meet in person and to kind of let you revive this tradition?
They are.
Great. What are some places, maybe other than the big boys, that you've in the area that you like to go to? Are there other
Coffee places?
Yeah.
In Woods, also around here, I actually really like Cafe Nero. And I love that new place, Pressed. And they have great sandwiches, too.
Yeah,
But they have very good coffee.
Yeah.
So I really love that. On the Cape, there's a place called Pie in the Sky that I really like. And there's a place I just discovered about 3 weeks ago called Nirvana. And it's like Nirvana. It's really, really good good coffee.
Wait, with all the way that coffee has led you way onto way, would you ever want to start a artisan brewing?
You know what? I think that I've been involved. When my kids were young, I always got involved in being the cheerleading coach or Girl Scout leader, because there was always things that they did. And I think the coffee, I just want to keep as something I enjoy as a recreational thing. Like, you see my T-shirt, it says coffee, beach, repeat.
That's
So now
a
on the
nice
Cape,
lifestyle.
I just want to be able to just enjoy doing that on the weekends, particularly.
You've worked on
Yeah.
it. So what is your go-to? Do you have a favorite technique or a favorite
I am
source?
a very simple coffee drinker. I like basic French roast, a grande French roast cup of coffee, and I'm really happy. And I make it at home. I buy a 2.5 pound bag at Costco, because Starbucks actually doesn't carry French roast any longer, because they know that retail stores do, so they stopped selling it. And I think that's their best blend.
So do you have
So I have a Costco membership.
special sources? Like when you travel, do you introduce yourself to the independents and see?
I do. I go out and I tell them how I wrote a book and that I have an Instagram account, and I would love to feature them if they want to be in a picture with me. And and I always tag them as. And I usually have a good comment and get likes.
And it makes great travel
And
memories
it's fun,
anyway.
and it's really fun anyways, too.
Sure.
But
So
nobody offers me free coffee when I
Wow.
say that. They all look at you like, okay, sure, we'll have a picture.
it's a different
Yeah.
way of dealing. So after the reground, what might be the next topic?
Next thing, I love ice cream. And there's an ice cream store. I don't know if you've heard of Polar Cave. It's always on the news. So Mark, the owner of Polar Cave on the Cape, I had suggested last winter that we write a book about Polar Cave connections, ice cream connections. And he's open to doing that at some point.
Okay, that could be. You could do maybe a tie-in with coffee milkshakes or something.
Yeah.
Have a bridge book.
Yeah, well, their best flavor is mashed pea mud, which is coffee mixed in with Oreo and fudge and a whole bunch of different things. So.
Yeah, so is that that's kind of how I got introduced to coffee, was through my grandfather. Didn't drink coffee, but loved coffee and ice cream.
Okay.
So I didn't come to the real thing till college, but now it's part of the day. My daughter loves it. She's only 10, so
now so she's gonna end up like me.
Yeah,
Okay.
trying to keep that under control. But the book is great. A lot of great advice, a lot of great memories. It's called Coffee Connections. Wendy Bornstein, thanks for joining us. I'm glad we could be your introduction to television interviews. Have
Thank
a
you.
great
This was
visit with your
fun.
family later on.
Thank you so much. I really
and enjoy
appreciate
summer on
it.
the Cape. And we will hopefully see you all soon again on the Writer's Block.